Hello, I'm Emily and welcome to Where's My Handbag? So this is a short film for my extended project qualification and it is centred around the effects Alzheimer's has on my grandma and also our family and how we've adapted to overcome the illness. This is a film about my grandma, whose name is Wilma Jean. She was born in 1929 and moved over to the UK when she was 5 from Ohio in the US. Before she developed Alzheimer's, she was an active, flamboyant member of the community, always involved in any event that was happening. In her working life, she'd been a secretary, a very efficient one at that, and at gatherings she would always pull out the fact that she'd been the secretary for Vera Lynn. Grandma's biggest passion was music and amateur dramatics, and she was an exceptional hostess. While she could be sharp-tongued and opinionated, she was empathetic and perceptive to other people's feelings. So much so that if any pet in the household was ill, they would always end up sidling up to her because she would always be the best one to care for them. In 2015, Grandma was diagnosed with Alzheimer's after we noticed symptoms such as memory loss and never feeling full. She was given some medication which slowed the deterioration for a year and allowed us to adjust to how things were going to be. But once it wore off, her memory started deteriorating rapidly. In particular, I remember her repeating stories after a trigger word she'd heard in the conversation, like dog, and we would have to react every time like it was the first time we'd heard those jokes or tales. I think that was one of the hardest times because there was so much pressure for her not to notice she'd repeated something and embarrass her, whereas now she can't really recall that information, so those situations no longer occur. At the time, my grandpa was also her main carer, and it was particularly horrible because you could see how upset it made him to see her fading. On Christmas Eve 2016, Grandpa died, and although we were all devastated, I now see that as a blessing, as he didn't have to watch Grandma deteriorate any further, because that really would have destroyed him. After he died, she had 2 alternating 24-hour carers for a year, so that she could live in her own home. But that didn't really work out too well, so that's when we moved her into a care home. She's now been there for 2 years, and this brings us to the present day. Before you get to see Grandma in action, I'll explain what Alzheimer's is and what's happening in her brain, as this might give you a bit of insight into why she acts how she does in the videos that follow. A healthy human brain contains billions of neurons, which are specialised cells that process and transmit information via chemical and electrical signals. Sending messages between different parts of the brain and from the brain to the muscles and organs is their main role, but Alzheimer's disrupts this. Most neurons have 3 basic parts: a cell body, which contains the nucleus, which stores genetic information and regulates cell activity, multiple dendrites, which are branch-like structures that collect information from other neurons, and an axon, which is a cable-like structure that transmits messages to other neurons. The survival of neurons depends on several key biological processes: communication between neurons and neighbouring brain cells, metabolism, which is the breaking down of chemicals and nutrients within a cell, and repair, remodelling and regeneration due to the long lifespan of neurons. Alzheimer's disease disrupts the vital processes neurons have to undergo to stay alive and functioning. The disease first destroys neurons and their connections in part of the brain involving memory, and later affects areas that are responsible for language, reasoning, and social behaviour. This disruption of communication between neurons is mainly caused by a protein called amyloid, the deposits of which cause plaques to form around brain cells. This happens alongside another protein called tau, which forms tangles within brain cells from its deposits. Eventually, many other areas of the brain are damaged, and over time this takes away the individual's ability to live and function independently. Ultimately, the disease is fatal, as a patient with Alzheimer's would eventually lose the capacity to breathe unassisted. But due to Alzheimer's being a progressive neurological condition, if the damage caused by Alzheimer's reaches the medulla oblongata, which is the part of the brainstem that controls swallowing, then aspiration, which is food being inhaled into the lungs, occurs, which leads to chest infections, and this is what many Alzheimer's patients die from. In Alzheimer's disease, symptoms are divided into 3 main stages. Early symptoms is where the most notable symptom is memory lapses. The patient's short-term memory diminishes, and this can then lead to mood changes due to increased anxiety or agitation.
Middle stage symptoms occur when the disease develops. A patient with the disease may find it increasingly difficult to remember the names of people they know and recognise friends or family. This is also where speech and language skills can become affected, and on top of this, they can experience delusions and hallucinations. Obsessive repetitive behaviour was a massive symptom we noticed in Grandma. She would become hooked on a certain task, such as mowing the lawn or painting the garden wall, and once it was in her head, she would constantly pester my grandpa about it until she was satisfied. But this satisfaction would not last long, and she would move on to another task to obsess about very quickly. Later symptoms become increasingly severe as the condition deteriorates. Hallucinations and delusions may get worse, patients can become violent and suspicious of those around them, and they demonstrate significant problems with short and long-term memory. Due to the Alzheimer's reaching the medulla oblongata, the patient can also experience difficulty with eating and swallowing, often leading to quite drastic weight loss.
I would not, could not in a box. I could not, would not with a fox. I will not eat them with a mouse. I will not eat them in a house. I will not eat them here or there. I will not eat them anywhere.
This is one of the activities that we've found that can cheer Grandma up and bring her out of the depressed moods that she can often be in as a consequence of Alzheimer's. As Alzheimer's progresses, and patients' mental age will often regress, and so this is why she finds children's books very entertaining. I found that especially with our favourite book, Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss, she enjoys the rhythm and the rhyme of the story. In particular, I've noticed that she started joining in with Anywhere, which repeats throughout the book, and I found it really shocking because Grandma's currently at the stage where she no longer knows our names and she isn't really sure whether I'm a carer or whether I'm a family member. So for me, this was a massive achievement because it shows that she's engaged with the story and the activity therefore was very successful. Music has always been a passion of my grandma's, so when I read in Contented Dementia about the idea of incorporating a past hobby into current activities, I thought I'd give it a go. This recording was from the first time I tried introducing the xylophone to Grandma, hence the reason I'm running from ear to ear when I realised it was something that she enjoyed. It should also be noted that in this clip, Grandma demonstrates her lack of ability to multitask, as the xylophone is all-consuming for her, so she doesn't sing along in this section despite knowing the words. You may also notice my overly excited involvement in the song, and whilst it is pretty embarrassing to watch back, this is one of the main ways I maintain her attention. By bouncing on the bed, tapping my knees and singing along, it comforts Grandma and makes us a team of two against the world. This is a particularly useful technique I also read about in Contented Dementia, as it prevents the patient from feeling overwhelmed by unfamiliar information they feel that they ought to know, and limits the consciousness of her memory loss. Although, ironically, Grandma doesn't remember she has Alzheimer's, she is aware of feeling out of the loop and isolated due to her forgetting a piece of information. But the fact that this activity relieves that feeling and maintains her concentration for this length of time shows me that this was another successful activity. It is such a relief when I find something else to engage her, as due to the deteriorating nature of Alzheimer's, situations like these can become few and far between. These two videos show the stark decline in Grandma's mental capacity, just in the last 6 months. Always eager to help us out when she was around for Sunday lunch, we decided to make an activity of folding socks to give her a purpose and a use while she was waiting for her dinner. Not only does an activity like this keep an Alzheimer's patient occupied, but it also boosts self-confidence, which can often be so low due to the disease. Back in August, this activity was an enjoyable thing for Grandma to do, and she was fully able to do it. But now in February, this is no longer the case. This is Emily of the future, hello. I just wanted to point out as well, what she just said there was like, she pointed to the dog and said, he said Grandma, which really gives a good idea of where her mental capacity is at the moment. They've kind of merged, she thinks the dog is now a child and frequently asks when he's going to school. So make of that what you will. Oh, you special talent there. Yeah. Can you ball them for me as well? When we would try this activity a few months ago, Grandma would naturally put the socks into a ball. I even remember one time when the whole family were at my house for some birthday or something, and Grandma was balling all the socks I had given her in such a special way none of us had ever seen before. She ended up giving us a whole demonstration of how she balls socks, with all of us around her trying to learn her technique. And I love that memory so much. But now she can't figure out how to pair them, and once she does, her old sock technique is long gone. As a family, we've had to learn to adapt our activities depending on what engages Grandma in the moment. And you have to be versatile and constantly thinking of new things to do with her, because it's so incredibly hard to maintain her attention and concentration. So that brings us to the end of the film. I hope that you enjoyed and that you found it really informative. If you do happen to have a loved one that does have Alzheimer's, I really hope that you can maybe take something from this film, especially if it's a bit of a struggle. When Grandma first got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was more of a struggle. And it takes a lot of time to figure out what works for them and what kind of entertains them and brings them out of some of the dark places they can be in. But I hope that you find it does get a bit easier, and I wish you luck with your Alzheimer's journey. We're still on ours, and it gets harder, but sometimes more rewarding, especially when you find activities like just showing you, and that is a great feeling to find something like that. So stick with it. Thank you for watching. Bye.